Calling the meeting of the St. John Waterworks District Board meeting. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. Burtek. Kroll.
Here.
I'm gonna box this.
Willigorski.
Willigorski here. Sims.
Here.
Let's see. And Schaefer here. We have the approval of the April 17th, 2024 minutes. Looking for a motion to approve those minutes.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Old business, well number 4, update.
Yes, well 4 has been completed, reinstalled, everything's running well. The total cost was $59,568, and we did gain an additional 600 gallons a minute with this occurrence, but just so you guys know.
New business, Baker Tilly financial plan presentation.
Good evening. Good to be back in front of you all. Eric Walsh, partner, Baker Tilly Municipal Advisors. Now can you hear me? There we go. Eric Walsh, partner, Baker Tilly Municipal Advisors. I think you all should have in front of you the water utility report dated May 8th, 2024. Tonight I'm going to spend probably 10 or 15 minutes going through the report. I'll keep this pretty informal. If you have questions, please interrupt me. I'm going to talk about where you stand today currently from a cash balance perspective. Why we talk cash primarily in your utility funds is because your enterprise funds, and from an accounting standpoint, what that means is you operate them like a business. So you want to look at your revenues, expenditures, and change in cash. So that's what I'm going to focus on tonight through most of the discussion. And we'll talk about forecasting out the next 5 years, taking your current 2024 budget and historical spending and revenue trends and where we see some issues arising in the future, and then kind of end it with some proposed action items and questions we have to take this to the next step. Does that sound fair to everyone? So I'm going to start on page 2 of the report, and I won't go through every page in detail, but I will hit the high points. Page 2, if you look in the right-hand column, 2023, and you go down to the middle of the page where you see total fund balances, you ended the year at $13.5 million. Does everyone see where I'm pulling that number from? It's important to keep in mind that's made up of cash and investments. Most of your investments are short-term. You do have some CD investments. Most of them you have access to in short order. The piece I want to draw particular attention to is the highlighted line, your construction fund. That is from the bond issue that was done in 2021, and there's approximately, at the end of 2023, $5.5 million in that bond fund. Beth is aware of this, as well as who you've used previously or prior for his bond counsel who helped issue the bonds. You have an issue with those proceeds that they need to be spent sooner rather than later. You have what's called arbitrage, and many of you may have heard that word, but what arbitrage means in the simplest form is when you borrow funds tax exempt, which these are tax exempt bonds, you can't make more money on that tax exempt bond proceeds than you're paying in interest. That's how you get tax exemption from the federal government. That's not been a problem for many, many years, but now that interest rates are up in the 4 or 5% range and you issued these bonds with a 2% interest rate, you're probably making more than you're paying on those bonds, which will create IRS repayment provisions within the first 5 years of the bond being issued. That's the main reason you really need to start getting these bonds spent. Typically, you should try to spend bond proceeds within the first 3 years of issuance. You're obviously just now hitting up against that point. I think, Bob, there's a plan, and you'll see I'll talk about it later on, Beth's office, I know, is working on this as well, but we need to get some projects into this construction fund and get these dollars spent down. Okay? It's not like you can use that 5.5 million for operations. It really is restricted for what the bonds were issued for, or doing an amendment to the bond ordinance to use it for other capital uses. Any questions on that?
I don't know what, as far as the interest that was being in the bond, based on how they invested it, are we able to, I'm not sure when it comes to term, reinvest that into a smaller interest rate?
Yeah.
It kind of gives us a little bit, we don't have projects to clear that out.
Yep. It's a good question. We're actually looking at the arbitrage calculation right now. You have what's called an interim calculation that is typically done at the 3-year mark, which is what you're coming up on now. You actually have the IRS arbitrage filing requirement at the 5-year mark. So we're doing that interim calculation now to say, are you setting yourself up for owing? Now, if you owe, as long as you pay on time, it's not as if you owe a penalty. All you're really doing is saying the excess interest you earned above that 2%, you owe that back to the federal government, is what you're doing. So you can get to the same place if you say, well, let's just restrict those funds, put them in a 2% account, and then we don't owe anything to the federal government, or we earn more, we got to give that money to the federal government. You end up with the same result.
And are those also, those proceeds, those are also done in arrears, correct?
I don't follow.
Or, so the interest we get that we have to report is basically done in the arrears?
Yes. Yes.
If we were to spend this all up, we still may be obligated 1 year after we spend it. based on
Correct.
those.
Yeah, at the 5-year mark, it's for that whole 5-year period. So even if, you got it down below that 2% in year 5.5, you still owe in arrears for what you've earned over that 5-year period in total. Good questions. If you go to page 3, pages 3, 4, and 5 are going to be very similar, but page 3 is where I will start. This is a summary, and this is in a high-level summary snapshot of your financial statements for the water utility. And when I talk about the water utility, keep in mind you have both in water and in sanitary, you have a small tax rate supported budget. This comes on the city civil budget. What we're focusing on tonight is really the user fee enterprise fund. So the part that's funded by user fees, tap fees, building fees that are related to the water utility. We're not talking about the small amount of tax rate that goes to the city civil budget, okay? So just to keep that clear. The top 5 or 6 lines are your receipts, so you'll see the largest one being metered sales. You do have some hydrant rental, fire protection, penalties, etc. We're showing in the left-hand column actual calendar years 21, 22, and 2023. Then we're showing your 2024 adopted budget. So we were not the financial advisor for the water board last year, so we did not prepare this budget, but this is the budget that was acted upon, adopted, and you would find in your gateway budget. However, when we went through this, and you'll see this in more detail, and we went through this with Beth and others, there's some line items in there based on historical spending we thought were either overstated or understated. So we took it and did an illustrative in the right-hand column 2024 budget. So the adopted 2024 budget, what you're going to see is much worse than what your spending patterns would actually show, are probably where you're going to end up. Does that make sense to everyone? We're not suggesting that you adjust your budget necessarily, but we are saying we don't want to have you all make decisions on rates and spending on an inaccurate budget. That's why we're showing the far right column. That's where I would focus your attention of where I think you're going to end up realistically. Any questions on that? Mm-hmm. The next section, if you go over to the left-hand side, operating disbursements, I'm going to break this down line by line on the next 2 pages, but this shows in summary by the plant operations, so source of supply, that's your wells, plant, obviously that's what the plant, transmission, distribution are your lines out in the system to the homes and businesses, so on and so forth. Then we have what we call below the line receipts. Those are things like interest income, tap fees, system development charges. Those are when new homes are built, and as part of the building permit fees, there's a system development charge. And then your repayment of the sewer loan that is getting paid back to water, and you have 1 more year, and you'll see that in the forecast that we show as well on that loan repayment. Then we also have what we call below the line disbursements, which are things like bond payments, payment in lieu of tax. That is a payment that your utilities make into the general fund on an annual basis. as if they were a tax-paying entity. If your water utility was owned by Indiana American Water or one of the for-profits, they would be paying property taxes into the general fund. This is in essence treating you on par so that your general fund does not lose out by not having a tax-paying entity owning the utility. And then the third bucket of non-operating disbursements is capital improvements, which is just as it sounds. That's infrastructure, rolling stock, et cetera, investment back into your system and equipment. At the bottom line, what we do is we show this on cash basis for those of you familiar with accrual versus cash accounting, and we're showing what is the impact on cash or increase, decrease in fund balance. So you'll notice 2021, very large cash increase, $9.2 million. That's because that's when you got the bond proceeds. You had an $8 million bond coming in that year. In a more normal year, though, you'll see in 2022, you had about $1 million of positive cash flow. However, I would remind you, $500,000 of that is the repayment from sewer to water for that temporary loan. That will go away in future years. And then in 2023, you actually saw a decrease in cash of $224,000. Now, much of that decrease, or all of that decrease, is driven by, in the non-operating disbursements, you see the $1,995,000 of project cost. So that's spending down some of those bond proceeds from 2021, 2 years later. Okay, so it's really a timing issue. You would have had positive cash flow if not for that. Then we show your adopted budget. If you spent as is adopted, which is, as I said, a likely inflated operating budget, you would decrease your cash about $2.5 million. About half of that would be bond proceeds spend down, but then it will be showing you unrealistic really, that you'd be having a negative $1.2 million cash flow. That's probably a red flag that goes off. That's why we restated your budget, because right away you'd be looking and saying, so how are we going from positive cash flows each of the years to now having over $1 million of bleeding cash? That's because, again, the budget's being overstated, which is why we restated them into the illustrative 2024. Okay? So realistic budget, revenue minus expenses in the far right column, we still estimate you'll have a negative cash flow of about $670,000. But notice 4 lines above that, $1.5 million of that is project cost spend down or bond proceeds spend down. So we want to normalize that out. So you will have a positive cash flow, taking away the timing issues of the bond proceeds to bond spend. Does that make sense to everyone? Mm-hmm. Pages 4 and 5 are the same numbers. The difference is we extrapolated out your operating expenditures. So on the previous page where you would see source of supply in total in the far right column was $640,600. Now we've broken it down by actually each account within your Keystone accounting system. We do this for Beth and her office so that they can input this budget actually into Keystone. Then you guys can see a printout, real time, spending to actual, line by line by line. So that's the purpose of the more detailed report. If you flip to page 5, you come down to the same bottom lines, though, as what I went through on the previous page, so I'm not going to revisit that in detail. Page 6, this is a very important page to the report. This is your capital expenditure plan for the next 5 years. This is information provided by Bob and his team. This is where I would spend some time really looking through and saying, okay, are we all on the same page? Do these things need done? I would also focus on, I know you don't have a crystal ball, Bob, but as you get farther out or closer to these, are these real costs? Are these changing in today's environment with supply chain issues that are still lagging, historical cost increases not really staying in line with what's been expected? We want to make sure this is as real and accurate as possible, because this really is what will drive rate needs in the future, okay? And I'll point you to some of the large ones, like in 2026, middle column, the new Hack Street Water Tower, $4 million. Obviously, that's a big ticket item that would be on this if that project gets done. You also have some 2021 project costs. Those are things that were included in the original bond issue, not being spent down, $1 million of it until 2027. That's an area, and why I highlighted it, Bob, is really, can things that are in that be moved up? Because we really want to get that bond proceeds spent down sooner than later. I also would say, like the Hack Street Tower, if that is something that is going to get done, could get designed and engineered and done sooner, that's not included in your original bond issue, bond documents, but you can at the council level have an amendment to that bond ordinance. It's a simple amendment, 1 page that passes it and says, hey, we have the bond proceeds, we want to spend them on this water tower, and then you could use those proceeds to spend down the majority of them. At the end of the year, you had $5.5 million sitting there. Between the well house and the 2021 project costs, that's only about $4.1 million. Even if all that was done, you're still going to have money sitting there even after this plan. And again, what I really want to reiterate is if there's any way we can move this stuff up into like 25, 26 at the latest, we want to get that 5.5 million spent down sooner than later for tax compliance purposes. Any questions on any of the specific capital items here?
So the 5 years, 2026 is the 5-year window, right?
That will be that's when the calculation is due, but by IRS guidelines, you're really supposed to be spending your bond proceeds by year 3, which ends like right now.
So if we move those projects up, then you would have to hire architects and all that other stuff. That would help some of the cost spending too,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, you get construction, planning, engineering, architects, is all eligible bond proceeds expenditures.
Okay, so then that would help spend some of that money.
Yes, yes. What I just don't want to do is the money sitting there and we just keep kicking the can down the road, because then you'll result in all kinds of IRS issues at
Yeah,
that
no,
point.
we're gonna lose it anyway, so might as well
Yep.
spend it
Yep.
and do something.
Okay. So, some of these are placeholders, Bob, like equipment, general maintenance, things like that we just keep in there. There's not necessarily something specifically identified, but where I'd really like you guys to focus is the large ticket items. What do we want to move up? What can we work into the bond issue? And then we'll work with Phil and bond counsel to amend the bond ordinance if we need to get that done. Okay? The last piece on page 6, if you look at the bottom right-hand number, when you take all the capital shown here, it's about $13.5 million. The highlights, not the Hack Street Tower, but the other highlights add up to about $4.1 million. We're saying you're going to spend bond proceeds on those. So we net those out. That still results in about a $1.8 million per year need in capital spending. When I say per year need, I mean rate funded need. So your rates, if you do all of this, have to support about $1.8 million each year. To give you a feel for that, in 2021, which was the last time that you adjusted rates, in that plan, the capital allowance was about $400,000 per year. So you're more than 4 times the capital allowance at that time. Bob, you probably remember at that time, there was changing in engineers. There was, what are we going to put in our capital plan? What needs done? There was really no agreement on what needed done, and the plan wasn't there. So it was just a placeholder of $400,000 when rates were set. Now we actually have at least the semblance of a real capital improvement plan, and the needs, primarily driven by Hack Street Water Tower, are significantly higher than what was at that time. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well. Yeah, it was a placeholder. It wasn't a plan. Okay. So let me tie this together on page 7 if you look at the chart. And I'm not going to say colors because I printed off a black and white copy, so I'll probably tell you the wrong colors if I do.
Before you get into that, I just got one question,
Yeah.
so I make sure I understand it. So basically, with our current rate study, or current rates that we have, and we spend all the bond dollars that have been allocated to us already, in the future years to support CIP, right now, we're only, based off the rate, we're only putting in about $400,000 into the enterprise fund or DEI fund to do those improvements, but yet on the books, or what we're showing is we have roughly we need $1.5 million to support those projects.
Exactly. Yep. And you do have fund balance, even outside what I showed you on that first page, the 13 million, even outside the bond, you have healthy fund balances. So you can even afford to do that 1.5 for a few years. But what you'll see on this chart is you're going to trend to basically where you get to minimum reserve levels unless you either reduce spending or adjust your revenue side in the next, I'd say, 3 years. Good question. So the top half of page 7 shows you estimated receipts and disbursements, receipts on the left, disbursements on the right. You can see in the color-coded operating receipts, so that's all the information I went through. That's things like your metered sales, your penalties, et cetera. You'll notice in 2023, 24, and 25, you also have that $500,000 temporary loan repayment coming from sewer into water, but you'll notice in the receipts column starting in 2026, that goes away because then that temporary loan is repaid. On the expense side, you have your O&M, that's operation and maintenance. So that's the budget we just went through. That's day-to-day costs. You can see that's trending up with inflationary allowances as we go, but you're in the $3.5 million range over the 5-year period. Then you have your debt payments. That's fixed, known, and measurable. Unless you issue other debt, you're paying about $700,000 a year in debt payments. So that's the $0.71 million. You have your your payment in lieu of tax costs is next. That's the number that goes into the general fund. That's fixed, known, and measurable. And then the real variance is your project and capital cost. So those two line items are the ones that you see fluctuating from year to year in that disbursements column. For instance, in 2026, you would see your capital cost being $5.7 million. That's when Hack Street hits, okay, as well as the other ones. So you'll notice in every year, your revenues are not keeping pace with your expenditures. Now, some of that is okay because some of that you're spending down that $5 million in bond proceeds. So you're going to have some negative cash flows because you have to spend $5 million that you're not replenishing, okay? But you'll also notice if you go to the second chart, the line chart, and I'll focus on the top line, which is what I call the realistic budget. This is the restated budget. You would notice you start to have that really big drop in 25 and 26 as you go to Hack Street. And as you're comparing that to the line for your required reserves, you'll notice about 26, 27, you get down, in essence, to the required reserve levels, which means you're really at the point that you're almost forced to raise rates at that point or cut spending. Required reserves, when you have bonds outstanding, those are legal covenants in your bond ordinance that you made promises to the bond holders. You would hold minimum reserves in your operating account and in your debt service accounts. Okay, that's what that line represents. We don't want to go below that. Okay. The other line, the line that's labeled estimated ending cash adopted, that's that adopted budget I talked about that I think is well overstated. If your spending actually did trend to that, you'd be negative cash by 2026. That's not realistic. It's overstated by several $100,000. But I wanted to show you that illustratively so you could see, what it's setting you up for. Future years, your budgets will be much tighter, much more accurate. You won't have to deal with that issue. So if I go back to 2021, when you adopted rates and you look at this, I want to oversimplify here for a minute. It gets to be really simple math when you look at an enterprise fund because it's just like running a business. It's revenues minus expenditures. Did you have to dip into your savings account or did you add to it? It gets to be that simple. When I look at 2021, when you set rates, your revenues today are almost right on track with where we estimated your revenues would be. At that time, a 30% water rate increase was adopted. That's a high percentage. That ended up being about $4 a month to the average residential user. When I say average residential, I'm talking 4,000 gallons a month. I know most people probably use more than that, but that's what the state uses as an average residential. So somebody using 4,000 gallons a month of water saw their bill go up $4 a month back in 2021. Your revenues are trending right where we thought they would, okay? Your operating expenses, so your day-to-day salaries, wages, repairs, maintenance, purchase power, all of that are actually trending very close, even 3 years later, to where we estimated, and even with all the inflationary fluctuations and everything. The big change in all this is your rates were set on, as you alluded to earlier, $400,000 a year. Now we're showing $1.5 million plus a year in your capital plan. That's why page 6 is the key to all this. What are you really going to do? What does everyone agree, council, board, et cetera, needs done? That's going to drive if you need to adjust your rates or not in the next couple of years to support this plan. Does that make sense?
It's just a simple question, but okay, on the original bond,
Yes.
you get a 2% interest, and we're getting at 4% because of the way interest rates have gone up. The 2% that we get on that, is that allowed to go into our reserves to use to prevent a wage or an increase later on? Or that has to be spent too, that interest that you get on it?
The up to 2% that you can get, that can go into your operating fund or it can go to pay back debt, either one. You can put interest income into your operating fund and use that.
Or we can put it in our reserves.
Yes.
To help later on in 2028 or
Yes.
2029.
The issue is anything above that 2%, you owe back to the federal government.
Okay.
Yep. But your other core fund balance, like the money that you're investing out of your operating fund or the money you're investing out of your depreciation fund, you can earn whatever you can get on that. That doesn't have any restriction. It's just the bond proceeds, that $5 million that's sitting there.
So that's when we have to spend the 5, not,
Yes. Not the full, if you go back to the first page,
for the 5, and, okay, interest rate 3 and 4, that has to be spent then too, right? Because that's the extra, or no?
interest rate 3 and 4.
Let's say like, okay, the first 2 is fine.
Yes.
Number 3 and number 4 down the line, those have to be spent.
No, on the $5.5 million that's sitting there, that's the only money that's restricted on what you can earn interest on. You have $13 million. The other $8 million, you can earn 6% interest, and you owe nothing to the federal government. The 5.5 is the only thing restricted. That anything above your yield, basically on the bonds, you have to pay back through your arbitrage restrictions.
That would be the extra 2%.
That would be the extra. Yeah, just don't even count on that because it's not your money. It's the federal government's money.
But the first 2, we could just put that in the future
Yes.
reserve or
Yep.
whatever.
Yep. Correct. If you go to, the rest of the pages really just have your outstanding debt. One point, because the question was asked before, and I think it is a good point. If you go to page 10, I want you to notice, because this differs from like what you would see in the sanitary district. Your 2017 bonds roll off in about 5 more years, but then your 2021 bonds were structured around those 2017 bonds. That's called a wrap structure. So if you look at the far right, for the next 15 years, your bond payments are about level $650,000, $660,000 a year. Doesn't matter that it's 2 different bonds and one pays off, et cetera. Your rates have to support the total payment. Okay, so we wrap the 21 bonds around your 2017s. That mitigated rate impact at that time. And then on the very back page, page 12, this shows your water and sewer rates combined as compared to state averages for similar communities of your size. You guys do have very reasonable, very, I would say, if you're comparing yourself to other communities, you compare very well with your rate structure.
Basically, the way things are showing now, if we wanted to go out for further bonding at some point in time, it's.
Yeah, if you want to talk about, well, actually, I want to hit, I'll answer that question, then there's one thing I actually forgot to mention. If you decided, hey, we don't want to spend this much cash, we want to use all of our bond proceeds, but we also don't even want to spend cash on the Hack Street, let's say. So we want to go out and borrow more funds to do that project and some others, you would have to do a rate adjustment. You don't have the revenues to support it. I would also say you may want to think of like an interim financing until you know everything you really need to do, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go out and do like a $3 or $4 million bond issue if you think you have other big projects in years 7, 8, and 9. I would try to lump those all together, but then you say, well, how do we get the first part done today and not wait till you 7, 8, and 9? You can do a bond anticipation note. That's an up to 5-year financing. Do it through a local lender, or you can do it through a national lender, it doesn't matter. It's a short-term financing, gives you 5 years to get to the other projects, then you fund them all through a larger bond issue. Saves you on some of your issuance costs, et cetera. Does that make sense?
And I don't know if you would be able to answer this question or not. Is there anything that would require a referendum or amount?
Not in, no.
As long as the enterprise fund can support it?
As long as the bond issue pledge of payment is utility, water, or sewer revenues, that's what we call a revenue bond. So you don't have bond limitations, bond capacity limitations like you do on the city side. That's where your referendums come in, because those are property tax or income tax related. You don't have those here. It's really a matter of what can your rates afford, or what are you going to raise your rates to afford as your bonding capacity. The last point that I forgot to mention is you guys do have another interesting dynamic going on here, and this is in both utilities, so I'll talk about water here. When you look at your miscellaneous operating revenues, your largest one is water tap fees and system development charges. Remember, I talked about when a new home gets built, they pay a tap fee, they pay a system development charge. If you look at 2021, 22, and 23, The amount of revenue water was generating in 21 was 1.7 million from those two fees. 2022, it went down to 1.1 million. 2023, it's 700,000. So that shows you the building slowdown that you've seen the last 3 years. Now that's being buffered, not all the way, but somewhat of what you're seeing in interest income. 2021, water got $7,000 in interest. 2022, you got $165,000 in interest. 2023, you got $500,000 in interest. So those are moving inversely, but you're obviously not making up completely the difference in interest. What my concern is, if there's an economic downturn and your building permits and SDCs continue on a downward trajectory, and now interest rates drop, now you've got a double hit to your non-operating revenues, if you will, that you're really relying on to make your rates sufficient. So you're going to also need to take that into account as you adjust rates in the future, that you're really just offsetting, hey, we don't have now $1.5 million coming in from building development like we used to. We've got to, that was supporting your operations in those years. If you were, it was keeping your water rates lower than they really needed to be at that point because you had all that building going on. Does that make sense? And I know you guys are, at some point we'll run out of room for some of the building, and that will just naturally slow down regardless of economy.
So the bottom line is we're going to have to raise rates within the next couple of years, correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
I would suggest action items for you all is, one, you really study your capital as accurate as possible, that page 6. We need to know what everybody's in agreement on and what you want to accomplish. And then we decide what can go in the bond issue, and we kind of take that out of the plan and we say, this is what's left. And that tells me, is it $1.5 million a year? Is it $1 million? Is it 700,000? What is that number? That is going to be the driver of all this. Then I feel pretty comfortable with the trends that we're seeing, and just in the communities we work with, being conservative on where we think interest rates will go, of what your non-operating revenues are going to do going forward. And that's going to be a lower revenue number. That's actually built into this report already. We're conservative on those estimates. That's going to result in the rate adjustment that you don't need today because you have healthy cash sitting in the bank. But the longer you wait, you're going to eat that cash. I wouldn't wait 3 full years to do it because it's going to be a smaller, reasonable rate adjustment. You could even phase it in if you did something in the next year or so versus 3 years from now where you may be forced to do a larger rate adjustment. I always recommend to communities I work with, nobody likes a rate increase, including the ratepayer, but I've never been to a meeting in 20 years where ratepayers came up and said, hey, thanks for raising my rates 30%, or thanks for not raising my rates for 5 years and raising them 30%. They usually say, well, why'd you wait 5 years to raise them 30% instead of just raising them, 5% a year for the last 5 years? That would have been a lot easier for me. Most ratepayers, some don't even notice when you do the small incremental rate, but they can also build it into their home budgets much easier than the bigger one-time increases. And in today's inflationary environment, the cost of materials going up, you have all kinds of pressure on costs going up, whether it's capital or operational. Many utilities are going to, it may not be every single year of rate adjustments, but it's definitely within every 3 years. There's some type of incremental rate adjustment going on to just keep up with cost.
So we're due.
You're due. I mean, look at your power providers around here, natural gas. I mean,
Yeah.
look at your own bills and those. Do they go 5-10 years without having a rate adjustment? No, they have trackers and everything. Their rates are adjusting every 6 months sometimes.
And our wild card is we don't know down the road, we don't have a crystal ball what kind of capital improvements need to be done. I mean, we just, have a well issue and everything else, plus the supply chain increases. So we've got a lot of moving parts there that we have no control over.
Well, I think, we have to come up and look at our CIP plan again.
Yeah.
And determine, with a huge amount of input from Public Works, to determine, age of our wells, age of our pumps.
Right.
And get that, starting to look at it on the books, figure out a 5-year plan. The CIP plan can always be adjusted, but we need to get something current. And Bob, we can't throw it on in the past. It's the past.
Mm-hmm.
We have to look now from this day on, where are we going to go, and look at a 5-year 5-year plan, and then once we have that plan, we determine, do we need a ground reservoir instead of an above-ground storage tank? Things like that, and get that in the budget. Then from there, once we know what the projects are, then look at a rate study to see what it would take to match those improvements. Because I think as any resident would want to know, okay, you're increasing the rate, but what's it being used for? Is it something
They just want to know
specifically-
why.
Right.
Why?
And
Yeah.
not just
I think that's perfectly put, because again, I'll oversimplify it, but as a numbers guy, I can estimate your operating costs and your revenues very well, because it's almost always going to be trend-based unless you're changing your operations. I can give you a really good number. I'm not an engineer and I'm not an operator. I can't tell you what you're going to spend in capital. That's what's going to change, and that's where I need feedback from you guys to set your rates.
So I think it might be something that we start looking at very soon.
Mm-hmm.
That we maybe just have a work session. We'll have to set up a date for that and have Public Works here and start talking about just throwing it out on the table, open discussion. Basically, it's almost like committee of the whole meeting and just, okay, what do we have out there? No item shouldn't be discussed, whether it's multi-million dollars or whatever. At least throw it out on the table. These are things that's going to happen, whether it happens in 5 years, 10 years, or whatever. At least we know where we're going.
In minors,
Should
oh, good.
look at the capital improvements we got from current things. Like
Oh,
John
I
said,
think
it's like that would be
Yep.
first priority before we just start building towers or spending money, but use that money to fix
Yep.
current things, so we might not have to look at those for 20 years or something. So then Bob would be the best guy to know on that, probably for.
Well, as for the bond money, we have projects in
But I'm
place
saying
right
if we have to
now.
spend money, might as well fix things that,
Sure.
why wait,
Right.
And don't be afraid, I mean, I know it costs money, but to get your professional teams involved, if that's engineering, architect, vendors, that the more accurate this can be, hey, we know we need to look at our well field, well, let's just not guess at a number there, let's have Peerless or whoever you guys use come out and actually tell you, like, they're trying to get your business, they'll usually do it for you, tell you what that cost is going to be, so we have an accurate number to base our rates on. And I would say, Bob, too, nothing's really too minor to go in, even like rolling stock, like are there vehicles in your fleet, stuff like that we need to consider. That should be in here too, even at that level. I know it's not a $200,000 line item, but those add up as well.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Mm-mm.
Any questions from the audience? Okay, I'm looking for a motion to accept the report from Baker Tilly.
So moved.
Motion made, second.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. Change order request for filter media.
I can do this.
Yes, if you can.
So, the filter media projects, we took acceptance of all the media. It came in on pallets, on semi-trucks. The only thing we could do to keep track of them was count the pallets and made sure it matched the invoice. There's 3/4 inch stone, there's 1 inch and 3/4 inch stone, so it's all a variety. We are now on the 3rd filter. That is completed with the media. The 4th filter, we did come across, we need a little more of everything, but when you break it down to inches of media inside the filter, the highest level is 1.5 inches. So that's why there is a change order for more media. So we can finish what we started.
Okay, I don't see if it's in our packet or not.
Yeah.
What the exact change order amount was.
Yeah, do we have a price?
I don't
It was,
see it.
yeah,
Unless I'm not looking right.
let me see. It was, I could give you a rough estimate. I can't give you the total dollar amount. Bill, did you have that by any chance, that request?
I can grab it from my office.
Yeah, so we can give them a total. I thought it was included. I apologize.
It's written in invisible ink. I don't see it. That notwithstanding, how's that project going?
Great. Going really well. We're getting really good results. The Gates treatment plant is going to be, both filters will be up and operating probably next week, starting next week. So we can see what we can flow through these filters, because as you guys know, we were actually able to double our capacity out of the plant with this new media. So we're really excited to see what we can do and
Good.
see how our quality is with the quantity we're pushing out.
You're happy with the timeline?
I am. They're
Good.
doing a great job.
Good, good, good.
I know that change order was roughly 19,000 something.
Oh, I don't
That was
know.
from, who's the contractor again?
Peerless. The media was bought from Water Surplus.
So will that change order go to them, or will it go to Peerless?
It would go straight through to, I believe, to Water Surplus. Yeah, it's very minute. It's tough when you get in the filters and you start spreading rock around and sand and anthracite.
Yeah, it settles and,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Some of the bags were mislabeled, so we thought we were good, and it was just a nightmare, but yes.
How many more filters do you have to go?
We have one more to go
Oh, okay.
at Monix Treatment Plant. 3 out of 4 will be completed next week.
You guys are doing good?
Yep. Yeah, they're doing real good.
You thought that change order was 19,000 something?
Yeah, I don't want to be, I can't think of I had it written down on my other notepad.
The board be,
Yeah, not to
open
exceed?
not to exceed $20,000?
That's fine.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Okay, so we can make a motion to approve a change order to Water Surplus in the amount not to exceed $20,000 for filter media.
So moved.
Motion made. Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Okay.
Reports and correspondence, Robinson Engineering.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well house number 8 design is progressing. We had a 80% meeting last week with Bob and all of the suppliers. We're still targeting next week for a submittal to IDEM. Expect maybe a 30-day turnaround on that, and we can get out to bid. Well 9, the connecting water main, I'm still waiting for the survey topography to get that one started, but that one's not going to take much to design in terms of time. So we're hoping to get that one out to bid, by the middle of the summer and get that rolling. And that's the 2 water projects we have going on in terms of building things. We're also still working on the Atlas updates and the lead service line inventory that is due to the state in October. So those are both on track.
So 8 and 9, that is also part of the bond.
It is. It is.
So just to remind everyone, the plan was to get 8 to IDEM, see what kind of their thoughts are on the design that we have, and then well house 9 is more of a copy paste then. So hopefully in the next 2 meetings we'll have a task order to you to do well house 9, hopefully at a lower cost than 8.
Let's see, any further reports?
Nothing from me.
Okay. Bob, any
We
reports?
touched on the filters, we touched on well 4, well 8, design stage. Water main projects, we had a pre-construction meeting. We discussed that. The start date will be June 3rd, and they're going to start at 85th Avenue and Primrose.
With that, did the contractor give an estimate of when he expects from the start as far as completion on that?
Completion, I think it was 3 months.
3 months?
Yeah. Not total completion, but,
Right. substantial.
right.
Let's see, item C, town manager, if you don't mind, I'll just bypass that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Give them a chance to come back here. So we'll move on to item 8, payment of bills. We have a bill for M&J Underground payment for $11,360.25. This is for the water main replacement, I take it, on Acorn?
Yes.
That is correct. They still had some restoration issues to take care of, some broken sprinkler systems, stuff like that. So we still are holding 10% retention from M&J. But this is the portion of the water, if you remember, this is a water and sewer project. So the 11,360.25 is just for the water portion of payout number 3.
Looking for a motion to pay that bill?
So moved.
Motion made, second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. The accounts payable voucher dated May 15th, 2024, representing payment for payroll, supplies, services, equipment rendered to the water district in the combined total of $25,172.26. For motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion made to approve, second.
I will second.
Anything under the question? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Item C, accounts payable voucher dated May 15th, 2024, representing payment for payroll, supplies, services, and equipment rendered to the water utility for the town of St. John in a combined total of $241,835.31. Looking for a motion for payment.
So moved.
Motion made, second.
I will second.
Under the question, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Anything from the public comment? We have none. We're looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
I was,
All those in favor say aye.
aye.
Aye.